Just want to start the show by thanking Ryan Payne of Gamers Week podcast and Pete Harney. Both of these outstanding gentlemen are supporting the show on Patreon. And you can too by going to patreon.com/agamerlooksaat40. There you can see our tiers, our rewards, and if you join on the $5 tier, you get 2 extra podcasts a month, 2 shows just for patrons of this very program. Once again, patreon.com/agamerlooksaat40. Thank you to both Pete and Ryan. Enjoy the episode. On the massive timeline of video game history, there are a million markers. Notable titles, important games, and influential figures. But there are very few sea change moments. The games that signal the end of one era and the beginning of another. And in the PC space, the era we've been spending the last few episodes living in, Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, and the band of rebels at id Software who built it is one of those high watermarks. It's easy to understate the impact John Romero, John Carmack, and the rest of the id team had on the industry. And to those of us who played these addictively violent shooters, it wasn't just a new way to spend time after school. It changed the way we saw the medium. I mean, at least for me, I went from stomping Goombas in Super Mario World to traversing the shores of hell in a first-person shooter. And while my home PC was never strong enough to run the game, I played it at friends' houses, constantly glancing over my shoulder to make sure a parental unit wasn't turning the corner. Murdering scores of demons on the thing our parents bought so we could do book reports and research term papers seemed deliciously counterculture. Kind of like the time I snuck a copy of Nine Inch Nails' The Downward Spiral into my home in the form of an unmarked bootleg. Playing Doom on the family PC was my form of teenage rebellion. Some friends had the stack of questionable VHS tapes, others Swedish death metal. I had a shotgun, a room full of cacodemons, and 2 levels of shareware Doom. And if the many conversations I've had over the last couple of months is any indication, I'm not the only one. On this episode of A Gamer Looks at 40, we look at the work of id Software, namely Wolfenstein 3D and the original Doom.
It's three-dimensional. It's texture mapped. It's Wolfenstein, one of the hottest-selling computer games in the world, in which B.J. Blazkowicz storms a Nazi bunker in search of Adolf Hitler. The game is the creation of John Romero and 5 other computer whizzes who comprise a company called id Software. Together with another firm called Apogee Software, Romero and his co-workers have parlayed a love of computers and computer games into a multi-million-dollar business. This year, Apogee, which sells software, and id, which creates it, will gross close to $5 million, up from $6,000 2 years ago. 31-year-old Scott Miller and 29-year-old...
Starting us off
George
on our
Broussard,
journey through id Software is Adam from the Retro Gaming Bygones podcast and the brand new Commodore Chronicles. If you haven't checked that out, it's awesome. Definitely check it out if you're a fan of the Commodore 64. He shares his recollections of Wolfenstein 3D. And after that, Greg Seward of the Player One podcast and of the Generation 16 YouTube series talks about his feelings on id's first breakout game. Were you a Doom guy at all, or Wolfenstein?
I was a Wolfenstein 3D guy.
Oh, yeah?
And that guy, John, I told you about, I first played it over at his house and then became absolutely obsessed with it. That was like the reason I had to have a good PC. And in 1995, as soon as my parents bought a PC, I like reached over and grabbed Wolfenstein 3D off the shelf, and they're like, "You're not going to play that." I said, "You're buying me this game, you know."
Wow.
And my parents were really conservative too, so you know the fact that you flipped around the box and it had like the violence scale on it, and it was really high, and my mom caved.
Wow.
Yeah, but I loved Wolfenstein, and I love Wolfenstein more than Doom, but I still love Doom. I love that
Yeah.
you could play Doom and everything. But I was more blown away, I think, because I played Wolfenstein well before Doom even came out. Well, I guess it would have been just a year. But Wolfenstein was like the first-person shooter I had ever really played. And actually, I had played the one before it, but wasn't seriously thrilled about it. The Catacomb 3D, which is what Wolfenstein's engine is based off of.
Mm-hmm.
And just Wolfenstein itself, John showed me it. We played it for hours, and it was stuck in my brain. And I still have my copy of it today.
Nice.
Along with the giant, I got a special edition that came with like a special guide that had all the maps of all the levels.
My first memory of, because I did have a computer. I shouldn't say that. I was going to say I didn't have a computer. It came out in 1992, Wolfenstein 3D. So I didn't have a computer that was capable of playing games like that. But I remember vividly the first time I remember seeing Wolfenstein 3D, it probably would have been late 1992. I was in high school, and I was staying after school for some reason, and we happened to be in the computer lab. And a guy that I used to borrow games from, Garson was his name, he had his pack of 2.5-inch floppies, or 3.5-inch floppies, sorry.
Nice.
With him. And one of them was Wolfenstein 3D. And I just happened to come into the room while he and another friend of mine, whose name I don't remember, had Wolfenstein 3D running. And I saw it for the first time. I was like, oh my God, that is amazing. Like, that looks so cool. I'd never seen anything like it. So that was really it. I didn't really play it when it was out. But that was definitely my first exposure to something like that. Also, kind of shocking too, seeing all the swastikas everywhere.
Yeah.
And pictures
all
of
the
Hitler.
Nazi imagery around there. Yeah.
It's
they didn't pull punches with that.
No, they didn't. But I mean, I was the perfect age to look at that and go like, yeah, totally rock and roll. Like,
that's awesome.
They kick ass for even daring to do that.
Right. I mean, Wolfenstein, again, it comes out in 92. Like, that's almost at the beginning of the SNES era.
Yeah.
Like, we're still playing Mario World, and like, we're not even at like your Chrono Triggers and Final Fantasy 6s. Like, we are still playing Pilot Wings and Mario World, and all of a sudden you see this on a PC running some place. And you're like, what is this? Like, wow. Like, it seemed like the future.
I mean, even then, like, and even not being a PC gamer, but going to arcades, you weren't seeing a ton of 3D games in the arcades.
No.
In the early 90s either, right? You saw there were a few, like, it was like Hard Drive-In and stuff like that was out there, but, or you had like way back with the wireframe 3D, but you just weren't seeing a lot of it. So seeing something like that playing, especially on a computer, so it looked way better than, your video games at home looked on your television.
Sure.
Yeah, it was incredible. It was amazing.
I had a cousin who always had a nice computer that can run these things. I'd play it at his house. And then I had another friend I grew up with who, again, always he was really into computers. Like, his dad would buy him all the stuff to build it, and he was like really into it. And we would play Wolfenstein, and then of course Doom, shareware Doom on his computer. We used to go over. Same as me, I didn't have a computer till 96. So for me, I never was able to really enjoy that at home. Although my parents would have probably lost their minds if they saw me playing, Nazi shooter. Yeah. Even though it's like, no, I'm killing the Nazis. I'm shooting them in the head. This is great. Yeah, I don't think that would have gone over very well.
I think that was another thing, too, that I remember being sort of amazed by, because Mortal Kombat, I don't know what year Mortal Kombat was in the arcade, but it was sort of right around that time. Like, because I had forgotten, actually, I was playing this a little bit today just to refresh my memory, and I'd forgotten how, like, when you kill enemies, they don't disappear. They lay there in a pool of blood. Like, it's pretty violent looking for that time. Like you said, a lot of us were playing Mario and Sonic and things like that. So
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Mortal Kombat, I think, was maybe a year or so later. And I obviously the consoles, it was like a couple years later, of course, but in the arcade, I think it was part of the big shift of games moving more to the adult realm. And I think also a lot of it comes down to, and this is not an original thought, of how computers, of course, were really for hobbyists still at that point. So it was mostly adults playing it. Like, kids really didn't play PC computers back in 91, 92.
Right. No, I think you're absolutely right. And you know, someone who has spent a lot of time sort of looking at the history of game consoles and looking at what Sega was doing in the early 90s. I mean, that was kind of their whole thing too. You know, a lot of it wasn't just Sega who was recognizing this. People were starting to recognize that it wasn't just little kids who wanted to play video games. And you're right. You know, the PC was always kind of for the older group. The PC was where you went and had like really intricate flight sims, and you know,
right.
like one of the first games I remember playing on someone's really powerful PC was a War Hawk or something. It was a World War II fighter plane game. You were flying a biplane, and it was just like you're just flying around. I think you were shooting, probably trying to shoot down the Red Baron, but you know, it was just something you didn't see on home consoles, or like a Wing Commander or something like that, you know, where that did finally make its way to like the Super Nintendo and the Sega CD eventually during that era. But that was where you found, or the war games, like I mentioned in our discussion earlier, like that was where you found the stuff that adults played. So it made sense that this sort of hardcore, much more violent shooter was on PC first, because that's where you were going to get away with it. You didn't have to deal with Sega or Nintendo or NEC, right?
Yeah, or any guidelines, really anything like that. You're just releasing software.
Right.
Yeah. That's interesting. But as that, you know, of course, as the Super Nintendo moved through, I think that's when people started realizing these stories can be more, I'll say adult, maybe more mature in themes, not necessarily blood and guts, right? We can have like a Final Fantasy VI that's got a very in-depth story. You can have your Chrono Triggers. You can have those experiences that could be geared more for an older audience. And it's interesting how games kind of grew up with their demographic, you know, which I think is interesting and maybe almost unique in art forms, you know, where it kind of like evolved with, as kids get older, you know, it evolved with them.
Yeah, definitely. You know. And like you saying, where you and I are close to the same age, I think it was fun to be sort of at the exact age that they were aiming at when games started to grow up a little bit. Like, it was great to be like 17 and 16 when this stuff was happening. So you were totally old enough that it was totally fine. You didn't have to worry about your parents clutching, you know, doing a lot of pearl clutching, because you're also watching, you know, you're also used to watching really sort of violent movies at that point.
Right. You know, again, depending on, of course, parents and all, but no, you're totally right. It's very, it's interesting how and people wonder why video games really stick nostalgically with people our age. You know, because it grew up with us.
Yeah.
Right? It grew up alongside us. And how could you not have a connection to that? We never had to grow out of it. And people do, of course, right? I mean, I have a period of my life where I played very little games, right?
Right.
But, you know, it's for the most part, it kind of grows up with you. So it's kind of interesting how that all shakes out.
Yeah, definitely.
If you played Doom in the 90s, this song should be bringing back all the adrenaline-fueled feels. Like, this should be pure ear candy to you. I love this song. All the music in Doom is fantastic, by the way. Next up, Ryan from the Gamers Week podcast starts us off with his first-time impressions of this amazing title. And then a new friend to the show, Julian from the Nerds Without Pants podcast, shares his experiences with Doom while growing up in a restricted household. Yeah, what did you think when you first popped that that floppy disk in there and started playing Doom? Can you place yourself in that mode and think like what were you feeling at that moment?
So the gratuitous violence was like this immediate, oh my God. And, you know, as a kid at the time, I don't think I was as sheltered as other folks were, but that was definitely a shocker. As soon as you got into it, you're brandishing a gun, and all of a sudden this guy in front of you, his chest explodes, blood comes out of it, and you're like, oh. And that instantly made it cool. Instantly, you wanted to do more because, for one, you knew if your parents saw you doing this, they probably wouldn't be too pleased watching.
Right.
And the other piece to it is that it felt that from that first person perspective was not something that you experienced a lot of in gaming prior to that. I mean, there was dungeon crawlers, which, you know, to the time, there were certainly ones that were done better than others. But for this one, there was a lot more control. You weren't just going from one section to the next. You had free reign as to where you wanted to go. And then all of a sudden, as you further get into the game, you recognize that there's secret levels, secret sections, different weapons that you can get. And all of a sudden, it gained that additional level of coolness, right? Because then you spent hours upon hours trying to find where stuff was. I remember specifically just shooting at walls, trying to see if I could get something to move for hours at a time. And then this is where really the idea of passwords in games. I mean, I remember having a Game Genie as a kid, but that came with a booklet, right? So that was easily accessible to me if you wanted to change something about the game. But this is where friends sharing codes with each other came in for me.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay.
So I specifically remember my cousin at the time, who was, you know, probably 5 or 6 years older than I was, going down the road because he lifeguarded at a pool that we used to go to. And as he is sitting in the lifeguard chair, I'm there with a pen and paper writing down the God code and all of the different things. I'm going, okay, cool. Okay, what else do you do? And of course, he's trying to watch and do his job.
He's trying to be responsible for the lives of the people in the pool. And you're like, hey, man, how do I get infinite ammo on the... That's awesome. Yep. Very good. Very good. Very irresponsible. I love it. I was always taken by how fast it was.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't own it. I had a friend who was a big PC player, and he had it. And my cousins had it as well. And I don't remember if I played it at Pedro's house or if I played it at my cousin's. I think it was at Pedro's. And because he had a beast of machine, he was a real enthusiast with PCs. So he had a machine that can run anything. And I just remember just not being terrible at it because I'm using the keyboard, mouse and keyboard, right? Which was alien to me at the time, just completely alien. Alien to me until maybe a couple years ago, and I finally decided to teach myself, like, no, I'm going to play these games on my PC. I have 1,000 games on Steam. I'm going to learn how to use mouse and keyboard, damn it. And I'm still okay at it. Anyway, but just being completely destroyed because it was so fast. I never experienced a game that was just so nimble. Yep. And man, was it just exciting to just run through those hallways and scary, you know, things exploding. And I was definitely a little more sheltered. So, you know, head on a swivel. Mom and dad, they better not be coming in.
And so my mom's coworker gave me a shareware copy of Doom, of the first episode of Doom. I did not know what shareware was. I just thought that was the game. I thought that was all of Doom. I thought that the game ends with you in a black room getting killed by things. I was like, oh, well, that was really fun.
Great.
I think it does give you an ad for more later on, but I didn't, it just, something about that, I didn't grok that concept. I was like, well, no, this is the game, right? Because I finished, like, you don't release games in segments. That was it. But I had a blast with it. Like, I come from a very religious household, so there was something very illicit about getting to play that game because my mom didn't really know what it was. Definitely that was a time when, you know, parents were only just starting to realize that video games had some, you know, like more mature content. They'd had it for years, but it really wasn't until like the mid 90s where that started to become like an actual issue. So that slipped under the radar in my house.
Well, because kids really didn't have access to these things, right? Most kids, you know, computers up until like the early mid 90s, like you said, were really for hobbyists, you know, people who, and hobbyists, of course, are going to be adults. So it made sense that some of the humor and some of the games were really a little more adult oriented than, of course, NES and Super Nintendo.
Oh yeah, but even on like NES and like 16-bit systems, there was some stuff that was like, whoa, like,
oh, true.
I will never forget playing through the first level of Monster Party
on the original Nintendo, where everything transforms and like all of a sudden the enemies are like blood-covered dogs with human faces, and it was not okay. And then there's that is it Techno Cop for the Genesis, where you just turn enemies into chunks of meat. Like it's super graphic for the time.
Coming from that pretty strict household, I can imagine, without putting words in your mouth, and tell me if I'm wrong, playing a game like Doom must have felt like you were breaking every rule.
Absolutely. Well, not at first, because if you remember, like the way Doom starts out, it's got monsters, but I mean, monsters are whatever, right? It takes a while before you start to see like what's actually going on. Like I will never forget like the first time that I got into a level where there was like, you know, the pentagrams on the wall, and like the bodies strung up and stuff like that. And I think one of the hallways actually, like it had this like upside down cross that was actually the door frame, and I was like, oh. And then it
now
was like,
I get the
no
theme.
one can watch me. No one can know that I'm playing this.
So before that, it was more just shooting bad dudes like you were kind of used to. That's interesting, because I guess that's a very good point. Doom doesn't get hellacious, for lack of a better term, or doesn't turn into that hellscape until much later when you bought the game, basically.
Yeah, you get a little taste of it right before the end of that shareware version. And yeah, like, cause I think that literally like the first Baron of Hell that you see is that last level of the shareware edition.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's funny because like, so there was this one time, it was after I had my PlayStation 1, that one of the brothers in my congregation who was studying with me actually brought up the whole video game thing and wanted to see what I had. And so I was like, yeah, sure, let me just clean up a little bit. And I stuffed Doom like under my TV thing, and I think I just left out like some other games. He still had like something to say about one of them. I forget what it was, but I was like, he can't see Doom.
Yeah, that's very interesting how violent it was. So Doom, of course, we all know about the violence. Of course, all the changes that it inspired in the gaming history. I forget, I've mentioned this on all these conversations, but I'll say it here. There was a question on Twitter I saw that stated, which is more important to video games, Mario or Doom? And I think the knee-jerk answer, of course, is Mario, but people forget how important Doom was to the landscape of gaming. It changed everything. Everything.
I would posit that it's on the same level as Mario, but on the PC track. So, because that definitely informed PC development for years after that. Not just for like shooters, but I don't think that there's like Diablo without Doom.
Yeah.
You know? Just because of that dark tone and kind of trying to make these like sprites, but kind of, you know, cram them into a 3D feeling experience, because it took me like a really long time to realize that the characters in Doom weren't actually like three-dimensional, because it played for me. Like, it took me a long time to realize, like, oh, if I like move around this dead body, it's always facing me. Like,
yeah, right. It's always looking at you. Yeah, that's a really good point. Next up, Greg continues our conversation by talking about Doom as a killer app on consoles. Remember, this thing was released on consoles. It was pretty much everywhere. You can play this on a graphing calculator. LGR Tech Tales does a really good episode on that. And after that, Justin from the Baseball and Whatever podcast touches on his childhood experiences balancing family and demon slaying.
I want to say that I probably must have played Doom on a computer, whether it was a friend's computer or mine, when it, because I think at that point we did have something that could run it. I loved it, but I remember too that Doom was right up there. Doom coming to a home console was kind of right up there, being as important as like Street Fighter 2 coming to a console, or Mortal Kombat, right? Like, it was, Doom was a killer app. And getting it on a home console was a big deal. So I remember, like, for me, the biggest memory I have about Doom is actually playing through it on the 32X. You know, it was just like that was I was a Sega kid anyway, and I was excited about the 32X, and I was excited about Virtua Fighter and Virtua Racing especially. But the fact that, if I remember correctly, was Doom a pack-in? I can't remember if it was a pack-in, but it was a launch game either way. So, you know, and super excited about that too, because I don't remember really playing through Doom before I got my 32X. So, you know, that version wasn't great. I still played through it. It's still a lot of fun. But it was a big deal. Like, it was a selling point for the 32X. It was a selling point that was on the Super Nintendo. It was always sort of right up there when it was announced that Doom was coming to this console. It was important. So that was really the thing for me. And then I agree. Like, that was, for as important as Wolfenstein 3D was, Doom to me is the game that kicked off the first person shooter.
Oh yeah.
That's when everyone was saying, wait a minute, we need to do that. Right.
Yeah. And it also kicked off the idea of like competitive multiplayer, you know, of death matches. I mean, and I could be wrong on that, but I don't think that really existed before Doom hit the scene. So the idea of getting a bunch of people in a room all playing Doom at the same time, competing, was just something that no one had ever seen before. And even graphically, what they were doing with hallways and what they were doing with the physics of it. It's a really astounding game, both technically and because I played it to prepare for this series of Doom interviews maybe 3 or so weeks ago, and I was amazed how well it plays. Like, it still plays like butter. It's fantastic. It's so fun.
Yeah, they do, and that was one of the things too. Like, in playing Wolfenstein again a little bit earlier, one of the things I remember with Doom is that it felt much more like a fully realized 3D world. Like, I don't have enough experience with Wolfenstein to know if it opens up a little bit later, but Wolfenstein, you're kind of indoors, you know, you're in a series of rooms, and so you can't see very far. You're kind of in the room that you're in or the hallway that you're in. You don't really have a ceiling over you. It's just kind of an implied thing based on the height of everything in the room. Whereas Doom, even from the first level, like when you walk into one of those first rooms and there's like a window outside and you can like see there's like a courtyard out there and there's actually an item out there, and it's like, oh, wait a minute. Like the world feels so much more real, because, you know, you're closed in when you're inside. There's an open sky when you're outside. You can see other parts of the level through these windows and through these different openings. And it just like, it was absolutely sort of a next step forward. And especially playing side-scrolling games on console for so long, you know, like, yeah, those worlds felt well realized too, but all you ever saw was the screen you were in. And, you know, it's like anything outside of that didn't really exist in the from the standpoint of being able to see what was around you.
It's funny, like, obviously the jump of, you know, being first person, having weapons and stuff, and granted, I think I was maybe 6 when I started playing it. Oddly enough, the thing that I connected the most with it was when we first got it, you know, my parents, they kind of let me play whatever I wanted, and they kind of said, you know, as long as we don't see any changes in your behavior, you're not kind of acting a little off, you know, you can play it. But when we first got it, I had to play with my dad. That was the rule, you know, to make sure that it wasn't too violent or scary for me. And so, you know, these memories of playing Doom with my dad, who wasn't a big, you know, I wouldn't call him a gamer by any stretch of the imagination, but whenever I think back to those early games, I immediately think back to, you know, 2 folding chairs in front of the family PC, and we're just playing through the levels, because we didn't even have the internet at that point. I don't think it would be another year or 2 until we got America Online, which I'm really dating myself at this point, but yeah, you know, going through the levels, looking for the secrets, that was like my biggest jam, was just constantly going through the walls and clicking the space bar on every single little spot to see if I could find something. Cool. It blew my mind. Like I said, there was nothing like it at that time in my mind anyway, or anything that I've been exposed to at that point. So.
After the break, we move from first impressions to how Doom feels in your hands. And spoiler alert, it feels sensational. It still plays beautifully. Justin, then Julian, and then Adam join us after this. Hey there! Ever hear of a thing called Twitch? It's this site where people can watch other people play video games. It's really cool. Silly sarcasm aside, if you spend any time watching creators on Twitch, here are 5 people worth following and supporting. They're doing great work. First off, Super Nintendo Bros, Super Nin, the number 10 Bros. He's a streamer that plays all sorts of games from all types and stripes with exceptional production value and fan interaction. Mostly Nintendo, but he'll surprise you on occasion with something out there. As of its release, it'll be over, but he's also in the midst of planning and producing Nintendo Fest, which features over 20 streamers and content creators over the course of an entire weekend. Once you hear this, it'll be over, but check out the VOD. It'll be incredibly cool. G to the next level, mainly a Sega guy, but he'll dive into different platforms if the mood and the community compels him to do so. He's one of the nicest, most positive streamers out there with an encyclopedic knowledge of games from every era. He recently completed Super Mario Bros. 3 for the first time, and he liked it. About more than Sonic, but he certainly enjoyed himself. An amazing watch and follow. Red Ox PDX. She is a mom, a gamer, and an incredibly talented pianist who's worth checking out. One minute she's playing games from her library, the next she's taking requests and playing video game music on the piano. One of her most recent streams featured music from Metroid, and it was fantastic. Brinstar, so good. A good person doing good things. Follow her post haste. Post haste, I say. Ducks in Disguise. He's relatively new to streaming as far as I know, but you wouldn't know it from his content. Exceptionally produced and highly entertaining. As of this recording, he was about to finish Portal 2, and his banter with an animated GLaDOS that he created is absolutely priceless. Humorous, witty, and very, very fun to watch. Follow him! I command you! And finally, the Well-Read Mage. He's a true friend of the show and a constant supporter. Red combines humor, skill, and community interaction to create a lively watching experience. He's playing through a bunch of Final Fantasy right now, so if you dig old school Final Fantasy, definitely check out the stream. And he gives away stuff. Super cool stuff. He's worth an insta follow. Right now, I'm working through BioShock Infinite, so join me as I blast hordes of bad guys and attempt to decipher this confounding game. It's not a game I love, but it's a game I am trying to appreciate. Trying being the operative word. Twitch.tv, a gamer looks at 40 pod. Once again, that's twitch.tv/a gamer looks at 40 pod. I really love that because it really was one of the first games to allow you to push at the edges from a first-person perspective. Because games let you do that before, too, like Secret Passageways, and that's as old as games. But, man, that the ability to, like you said, just walk around this 3D environment and get in spacebar every single surface, hoping for something to open, that's a pretty priceless kind of thing.
Yeah, it's I feel like it's that it's so rote at this point, but that Skyrim, oh, you see that mountain there, you can go there. Well, it's like, well, yeah, we didn't have that back in 1992 or 93, but it was like, you see that door, you can click on it and go into the next room, and that just blew my mind. So
yes, no, that's very true. You're right, that the priceless commodity of pointing to the distance. It's like, you can just put in this 4 walls and maybe something cool will happen. Yeah, no, that's really
exactly. Or it's like, you see, far off, there's like 3 or 4 pixels. There's something there that's going to look realistic when I get to it. You just wait and see, so. But yeah, good times.
But I think the success of Doom is largely, and why it still endures, is in that gameplay.
Yes.
What do you why does it still work? Because again, I recently played through Ultimate Doom about maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago at this point, and I was amazed on how drawn in I was again. Like I couldn't stop. It felt so good controlling it. What do you think contributes to that?
It's the total package. Like it's crunchy. Like it, they're like, okay. I don't believe in like gaming vernacular being cliche. I think that things become cliche for a reason. But Doom is a very visceral experience. When you fire a gun, like it feels real good. That shotgun remains to one of the best shotguns in video game history.
It still is. It's still so good.
And I think, especially with like those original 2 Doom games, the fact that they're, basically it was, you just pointed and shoot and shot. You didn't have to worry about aiming. Once aiming got introduced into first-person shooters, like, I still play them, but I'm terrible at them. But I can still get down with some Doom. Like, I always loved that you could snipe an imp on a platform above you from across like a field, and it would work just fine.
Yep, it knew where you were trying to hit. I think that's a big part of it, is that accessibility and how it is just so pick up and play. It's kind of like, and this is going to be a bad comparison, but maybe not as bad as I'm thinking. It's kind of like Ski Free. The old Windows 3.1 program where you'd ski down the slope and then Yeti would catch you at the end, eat you, and you start over. There's something extremely approachable about a very simple premise and a simple control scheme in game. Ski Free is awesome fun, and I won't play like a skiing game, like on a, because the skiing game on whatever system's going to have 85 button combinations to do 52 tricks, and you're going to need to balance your. That's why like NHL 94 is still top 5 sports game ever made, because it's simple and easy to pick up and you can just play it and figure it out in 5 minutes. Unlike modern NHL games, you got to move the stick back and control your speed of your shot if you're going to do it. It's too simmy, right? So first-person shooters may be a similar thing. Obviously, there is a market for that modern first-person shooter, obviously, right? There is some value and joy to that. But there's also joy in that simple, I pointed the gun in the general direction and it hit the creature and he went boom.
Yes.
Yay. That feels good.
Even for me as a 14-year-old who had never really played any PC games and was not used to using a keyboard, it was like an instant pick up and play for me. And you get into E1, M1 and that music starts pumping and your character is flying through that stage. And again, just like the sound design, like right now I am like, I can basically play through E1, M1 in my head just from like sound effects.
Oh, totally.
I hear that door opening. I hear the picking up of the armor. I hear that first imp. Like it's just all right there.
It's so good, and you also hit upon speed. That game is fast. It is so fast, and that's part of the joy for me. Is just blowing through those levels. I don't even care about secrets. I just want to go as fast as possible and shoot as many things as possible and then get to that exit. Secrets are not a thing I care about. And it is just a joy to do so. It is a total package game. But I think sound design really is what we're hitting on here, is an underappreciated aspect, because there's I have a podcast I listen to where they mentioned the idea of intrinsic and extrinsic qualities in video game stuff. How everything should have an intrinsic and extrinsic quality. And I love that idea. Like a coin in Mario, extrinsically gives you a additional coin, which leads to a 1-up. That's what its purpose in the game is. Intrinsically, it's shiny, makes a cool sound, and it feels good to grab.
Yes.
So it does both. And that's what the Doom shotgun is. The Doom shotgun is extremely effective. I mean, you could shotgun your whole way through the whole game and be...
And I do, and I have, yes.
And you should, because it's so fun. You can use that gun through the whole game and be perfectly fine, and it just sounds and feels and looks so good. That intrinsic quality of that shotgun,
there are few things more satisfying than a point blank shotgun killing blast to a pinky. Because it's the combination of the feel of the shotgun, the sound of the shotgun, and the sound of the pinky hitting the floor. That all combine into just this very incredible experience.
It hits a special part of our brain that makes us happy.
Yes. And and that speed, like going back to that real quick, I mean that's why I don't I don't enjoy like Halo style games as much because they're much more deliberately paced. But then when Doom 2016 came out, I was like, let's go. Like, this, this is how first person shooters should play. I like most of the time in modern first person shooters, the sprint is what I want the normal walk speed to be. And it's not. And I just feel like I'm in molasses, and Doom just nails that, except for Doom 3. Because they try to do something different there.
Right. Yeah, man. Awesome. Well, Doom is a phenomenal experience, and it holds up so good even now. Like I said, I played it a few weeks ago and just baffled on how much fun that game is. So
yeah,
it's a classic. And it really, again, it elevated a lot of video games. It did a lot for the genre, and it did a lot for the industry as a whole. So it's hard to ignore Doom when it comes to that kind of provenance. And interesting too, when you kind of talk about that violence, you bring up an excellent point. Most people played just a shareware version. Again, as we got older, we all bought, I have Ultimate Doom. I actually ran through that a few weeks ago, and it's still fun. And I want to talk about the nuts and bolts of Doom, not just its like provenance. But all that violence wasn't that terribly violent when you really think about it. I mean, there's dudes getting shot and dudes getting blown up and things of that nature, but nothing we haven't seen before, I think. I think it was the nature of it.
It was the fact that it was in first person, and I honestly think a lot of it is the sound design goes a long way towards finishing off that whole experience. Not only to make it scarier and because all of the enemies have like a very distinct sound, so like when you hear a pinky, like even if you don't see it, it's coming. You just don't know from where. But I think like those death knells and just like that chunky sound of like the enemies dying, like it kind of like amplifies what you're actually seeing on the screen, which is, it's not too bad. Although like I still maintain that like the cacodemon death animation is disgusting and awesome. And it's probably why one of the only video game related nightmares I ever had was a cacodemon coming out of my closet.
No, that's nightmare fuel. Forget it. No, don't love that. And the way the death animation of that thing is still really gross. Like it's still him it's just slumping.
Yeah,
just kind of,
it's like that the sound that it makes. Like it's just it all comes together. And I think also just when you get deeper in the atmosphere of it, because maybe the enemies themselves don't. Like, they're not exploding into chunks and stuff like that. But there's chunks of humans all over the place.
Oh,
and
yeah.
There's, like, severed heads and all sorts of
legs,
creepy stuff.
Demonic faces scrolling by. And, like, the walls. And, it gets really crazy. It gets really crazy, so... And Doom even... popularized, and again, this is more me maybe being not as big of a PC gamer as others, it really did, popularize multiplayer, like playing together, like death matches and playing with a group of people.
I know
people have been doing that before.
We networked some computers at school, and we all got detention for it. So.
Did you really?
Yeah.
It was that, and it legitimized that, And again, I know there have been people been playing together, network and stuff before that, but Doom made it mainstream, and congressional hearings and the conversation of violence in games, and just it was such a huge sea change that I think is not really talked about as much as like a Mario Brothers, that sort of thing. We've gone through the recollections, we've talked about the gameplay, so now it's time to kind of put a bow on everything and talk about some of the side things Doom does extremely well. Adam and I continue our conversation by talking about some of the strange spin-offs that came from Doom. Jeff from New Dad Gaming Podcast shares a story about shareware and some of his kind of expectations with that. And then finally, Raji from the aforementioned Super Nintendo Bros shares a little bit about an underrated aspect of the Doom experience.
And then
That's cool.
Yeah, and then when Doom came out, I loved Doom because it was an increase in kind of action. It was faster. But I think what I loved about it more is like a couple years later when people started modifying the WAD files and started creating like crazy amalgamations of cartoons like Simpsons Doom or, there's all these really odd ones. And I remember do you remember getting in Chex cereal, you could send away and you could get Chex Quest.
Oh, yeah.
And
I had Chex Quest.
I had a copy of Chex Quest and I loved it. It was
fantastic. It's a great Doom clone.
It was like Doom without all the horror.
Oh my gosh, Chex Quest! I didn't expect thinking about Chex. Chex Quest was great. It had the little slime monsters, right? Mm-hmm. And you were blasting him with I forget what it was.
I don't remember what it was either, but I know like your first weapon looked like a rudimentary taser.
Yeah, it was like a taser.
Yeah, and you kind of had like pulse weapons.
That was it.
Any way id Software could get Doom into your home, they were going to.
They really did.
It's on everything.
So I probably had the opposite experience on Doom.
I hated Duke Nukem. Duke Nukem is for garbage people.
Doom was great, but funny story about shareware. I really didn't understand what shareware was. Like, I remember going to this, I don't know, it was like some convenience store or something, and they had a carousel out front, and it had all the floppy disks or whatever, and it was all titled shareware, and Doom was on there. So I got it, thinking I got the full game for some $10 price tag. I'm like, this is amazing. I take it home, I play it, and then I like reach the end where it's like, thanks for playing, and I thought that was it. Like, I was like, wow, that's amazing. And I remember replaying those levels over and over and over. Not knowing.
Let me correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, and maybe this is a different version of the shareware. My version of shareware Doom, after you got through the first level, it just transported you into a room with like 50 like demons and killed you immediately.
That's the one. Yes.
Yeah. So that wasn't even like, hey, thanks for playing. It was just like, oh, you're dead now.
No, like at the end, it would be like you died, right? That's it.
Because you can't play anymore.
Yeah. Okay. That was my version. And I thought that was it. I thought that was Doom.
Right?
I'm trying to think. Oh, definitely Doom.
Of course,
Doom and Doom 2. Yeah. And then for a while I got really big into the mods you could do. Like you could actually I got this thick book from the bookstore, and it had a CD-ROM, and it had a bunch of tools, utilities. You could open up and create sprites or modify the music. We could put, you could download a MIDI file and put that and replace like a song from a level.
That's cool. I didn't know you could do that. Were these the WAD files? WAS files?
Yes.
WAD?
Exactly. Yeah, so that's like the game, or like the map data and the level data and all that, and the sprites and everything was packed in. So I wasn't a great like artist per se, but we do goofy stuff. I'm trying to remember what I did with it. I think we just, I think we drew a remedial looking Pac-Man, and I think I replaced was it the Cacodemon or whatever that, if you remember that big eyeball looking thing, replaced that with like a Pac-Man, and it looked hilarious, and you're shooting with a machine gun.
That's great. And with all of the aspects of Doom we just discussed, you really can't talk about it without discussing the controversy. My recollections of Doom were probably a little different than others. I remember it being one of the centerpieces of the violence in video games conversation. Turns out it really wasn't as much because it was on the PC. And as I mentioned before, the PC was for adults, so it probably didn't hit as much as it could have. But Greg, Stewart, and I used Doom as a jumping off point for a broader discussion of that era of violence in video games and congressional hearings, and kind of discuss maybe it made more sense to us now as adults and fathers than it did when we were kids. And then finally, Justin wraps everything up with a quick discussion on a very important question. And of course, the Doom was one of the... Doom and Mortal Kombat were basically the two-headed dragon for the violence in video games conversation. It, of course, reached its way to Congress and all of that. I remember following that not following, because I remember reading the video game magazines, and the video game magazines became like news sources almost at that point, because they would always report on what was going on. Like the editors would become journalists.
Right. Yeah.
They're covering Senate hearings. What was your experience with that? Again, as a kid who was probably in that, we're the same age. Did you feel like, I don't know, what'd you feel about that?
I thought it was ridiculous.
Right.
But again, it's funny because looking back on that now, I don't agree with it, but I can empathize, right?
Yep.
Looking back on it now, especially as a parent, because that was 94, I think. And so like I would have been 18. 18? Yeah, I would have been 18 years old when that happened. And as an 18-year-old, I was just like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. There's nothing wrong with this. Like, and I would you'd be able to point to movies. It's like, I watch gore movies that have way more gore than that. Plus,
right.
I think the other thing that really took away from the gravitas of the whole thing was them making Night Trap sort of a central element of the violence in games. Right. Which,
very silly.
Anyone who, and being a Sega kid, obviously I was very familiar with Night Trap. Anyone who was familiar with that game knew that they didn't have a clue what they were talking about when it came to the content of that game. However, Mortal Kombat, sure. Lethal Enforcers, sure. Doom, sure. But again, as a teenager who'd been playing video games his whole life, I just thought it was the dumbest thing in the world. Parents are stupid, but I also didn't think you needed warning labels on CDs and stuff like that either, which was another thing that was happening then. But looking back on it now, I do totally get it. And even with the Night Trap thing, I get the point that, the reason there wasn't so much whether the content was violent or how the content was violent, it was the fact that unlike Pitfall Harry, who was a collection of a few sprites on a screen that was supposed to kind of look human, you had actual humans, you had actual people on the screen, and that's what they were talking about when it came to Night Trap. And, I look back at stuff like Doom, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is running in and just blasting everything that moves, and that's something that you don't necessarily want, a 5-year-old to be playing, for sure. I get it now. In hindsight, it makes way more sense than it did. I still think it was overblown, and of course, it was very political. But
right,
I think
and that was always my issue. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
sorry.
and I think I think the result of it was a net positive. I think it actually freed up the game industry to be more creative and have more creative freedom. Having those ratings on the games means that they didn't have to just, no one actually had to take the time to think, well, what if a little kid plays this? We got to warn them somehow. It's kind of built into the system now, and I think it really works.
I'm always, and I totally agree again. And obviously, perspective changes as you get older and life stage changes, right? Hopefully, it should. It's called growth. We should all be doing that. But I think it's interesting because as a kid, it was always the same thing, right? It's like, these people don't know. I was younger. I was probably like 91, 92. Well, I guess 93 is probably, 94 is when all that kind of happened. Like all the Mortal Kombat stuff probably came to it. I was 14. So I was right in the wheelhouse of like, parents know what they're talking about. It's no problem. Pulling heads off. As an adult, I curate when my son watches.
Yeah, for sure.
I absolutely do. Like he's not, yeah, of course I do, right? I'm careful not only about violence or anything, but content, because I know who he is and I know what he can handle based on what he's experienced and what he can ingest. He's pretty sensitive to things that like people are being mean or cruel. Like that really bugs him, it just hits him in a weird place. So I just try to curate that content because I care about my son,
Right.
And the more information I have is the better. And that's kind of where this led to, was just give parents more information.
Yeah,
we just want to know we want to know the sugar content in the cereal, right? Like you put nutrition labels on things,
right.
So we know. Like just let us know what it is, and then we can make a sound decision for our kids. In hindsight, that like you said, that's not the worst thing in the world. The weird thing is how it got to Senate hearings and Lieberman and all that. That was what was very strange, I think for the industry. But its concept was good. Yeah,
it was a reluctance. It was a reluctance to self-regulate,
Yeah, which is what you want.
Yeah, and Nintendo and Sega were the market leaders at that point, and they hadn't come to, and I think most people looking back on it now realize that it was those two companies that needed to come to some kind of an agreement to say, this is how we're going to handle this. And Mortal Kombat was a wonderful example of that when it came home, where it was like, Sega's like, damn the torpedoes, we know that this is going to sell to the teenage market we've been squarely aimed at for 4 years now. Right. Whereas Nintendo was like, sort of half-assedly scrubbing it clean. You're still murdering people. It's just not a lot of gore on the screen, and it's a little less violent, I guess. And it's like, the big thing being like the parents not having any kind of warning and any kind of information. I agree. Like, I personally feel like you definitely want you as a parent, it's up to you to decide what you think your children can handle, what you think they should see. But, it's not about regulating it to the point that the government or anybody else says your child is not allowed to see this. It's about you having the information to make that choice yourself. And that's where we ended up. Thank goodness. Thank goodness they came together and they decided, hey, this is the ESRB is a thing. Let's adopt this, and kind of more or less adopt the system that Sega had voluntarily started putting on their games at that point anyway.
Yeah.
And so that the government didn't take it any further. Now up here in Canada, it was taken a bit further.
Oh, was it?
It was actually made illegal to, I think it is illegal to sell M-rated games to anyone under 17 up here.
So you actually need to show like a license or an ID of some sort?
Yeah. And the way that, why I want to say that is because it didn't used to be, it wasn't regulated that way, but it had been up here for years that if anything was rated R, like an R-rated film, R or above, it was illegal to let children in to see R-rated movies, right? Gotcha. So if you remember the game Manhunt, which was extremely violent, when that came to Canada, they actually slapped an R rating on it outside of the M rating that was the ESRB rating, because that was, I believe, federally regulated. And then so I believe that was the first game where it was like, it's actually legal to sell this to children. So
interesting.
We did take it a little bit further, but can you imagine if Sega and Nintendo and the other big like EA and the other big publishers of the day couldn't have come to an agreement, and it had ended up being a government controlled rating system?
I can't imagine that. And it goes going to change. The goalposts change because whoever's in office, and it becomes yuck. No, it was smart. I'm really good for Sega for being so forward thinking. I mean, they were doing a lot of forward thinking things at the time. They were just they were always 6 months ahead. It felt like.
That's how I remember it, but yeah.
Yeah. No, they really were. They were doing a lot of innovative things at that time, trying to stay ahead of the big N. And but that was a biggie, right? Kind of like cut it off at the pass and say, no, let's just regulate ourselves. Let's put some warning labels on it, and no one will bug us. And then we can create the games and the art that we want to create.
Right.
I mean, without that, you'd have never had Phantasmagoria and other such wonderful titles from that. I would even say go further than that, though, with how it changed the landscape of video games as a whole. Like you were mentioning the ESRB, that didn't exist really before Doom came out, and then of course you had your Senator Lieberman's and the congressional hearings about video game violence because it's killing our kids, and all that rhetoric that happened. Doom was the straw that broke that camel's back. Like that was the one who made it a problem.
See, that's not how I remember it.
Okay.
I remember it being Mortal Kombat.
Was it more Mortal Kombat?
Well, see, I think Doom broke the camel's back, but that was not at the time. That was really, I think, because of Columbine. Because it was cited as being like one of the games that those guys played a lot and were kind of obsessed with. But the way that I remember it as living through it, and my memory could be wrong.
Oh, same.
But I remember Mortal Kombat being, because Doom was there, right? Doom was over in the PC market doing its thing, and especially now that I've read Masters of Doom like just last year, like it was a even bigger thing like at the time than I realized, because I was over here with my Super Nintendo, for the most part.
We've escaped from hell, we are back from the depths, and Doom is complete. But there's one more game I am feeling led to talk about. In every conversation I had about Doom, some point, somewhere, this title came up. And it's not related to Doom, it's a different publisher, it's a different developer, but it's a similar in tone. If not sillier and more lighthearted. It did a lot for games, just like Doom did. And I considered putting it in side quests, but it's too much to fit in there, and I considered its own episode, but there's not enough to warrant it. So here it is as a bonus on this Doom experience. And if you recognize this theme music, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, man, definitely. You also cited Duke Nukem in that list as well.
Yeah, so Duke Nukem, I played a lot. I enjoyed it. I don't think it had the same impact for me as Doom did, just because it was, Doom was like the first PC game I ever got my hands on. But I think what I liked about Duke Nukem so much was the different, I don't know if you'd want to call them chapters or stories of, I think it was Duke Nukem 3D or Total Meltdown, I want to say. Mm-hmm. And, you had the first wave of levels were all in, I want to say, was it LA? And it kind of had that city, that grungy look to it. And then, once you got to later in the game, or it might have been the second or third chapter, I remember you being in space and playing a video game that actually took place in space just blew my mind. Being able to see, the moon and the Earth and the stars, and that was so different to me than something like Doom, where I felt like it was just a lot of corridors and you're inside and things like that. That and just some of the interaction, I still remember being able to use like the pipe bomb and launch pipe bombs at the time was just, that blew my mind. Being able to, blow open sewers and go in sewers and things like that. So I feel like it took what Doom did and it just kind of ran with it, and it kind of expanded it to that next, foreseeable level, to kind of expand upon it. So that's kind of what drew me in with Duke Nukem.
Yeah, definitely. I never played Duke Nukem as a kid. That was
really?
Not a game I had. No, I never had a great computer until I was in about high school. And this was probably like 96, I would say. Or like a really computer that can play things. What games did y'all play back in those days?
So there was a lot of the like shareware stuff.
Yes.
So there was a lot, and it started clean and innocent enough. There was like Putt Putt. There was Commander Keen.
Yep.
Like Trolls. There was like any like insert nonsense kind of family friendly quasi educational games like that, and eventually like you lead into, of course, like Doom, and I think what's interesting for me is a lot of people speak highly of Doom and how transformative that was for them for computing. I think for me, Duke Nukem on PC was a lot more eye-opening, just in the level design, the cleverness of it, like the sharpness of it, like in the fact that it was kind of based in the real world. Like Doom felt kind of flat as far as it muddy and it's on Mars and just like disconnected to anything, as opposed to Duke Nukem had some basis in real world and the level design and secrets. And like I was watching a streamer recently on Twitch play through it, and the secrets I missed in the first couple levels
I'm sure
are just ridiculous. Like how on earth would you know to do any of this stuff? And it's just 30 layers deep, and the level design is really quite stunning.
Of course, Duke Nukem, I think, was a little bit after Doom, if I remember correctly. And
Yes, it was.
Probably.
Yep.
Yeah. Duke Nukem was just next level because you had a voice protagonist, which was, of course, John St. John, who everyone knows as the voice of Duke Nukem. Yep. What was your experience playing Duke Nukem, coming from Doom into Duke?
So it was like everything that was cool about Doom and then add an extra element of things I really shouldn't have been exposed to as a child. And so what's great about Duke Nukem as a kid, of course, there was, and I know that you're one of the things about doing this podcast is that you want your kids to listen to this later on. So I'm going to try to be as filtered as possible. But
that's fair. That's fair.
But it starts off in a gentleman's club.
Yeah.
And you can pay the workers at the gentleman's club money. And there's, of course, some revealing things about that. But also there was a lot of that violence that was involved with Doom that made it so great. And there was, if I remember right, there was some cursing into it as well.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that was like another, whoa, this is so cool. And going back to it as an adult, what the funny part for me was to see how many movie references that I did not catch as a kid were in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So the alien kill me and having to go behind a poster in order to get to the next portion of a map. Shawshank Redemption right there.
Yeah.
You know, and then just the fact that it switched to the moon at one point and then you had to go back. It just, there were a lot of cool elements to it. But the thing with Duke Nukem that was the biggest difference for me was that was my first time doing LAN to LAN connection.
Yeah.
So I specifically remember dialing into Mike, who lived a few streets over, into the modem. So hearing it like dial like, you know, and then of course we would play and it was like 1v1, which at the time was amazing because it's not something I'd ever done before. So nowadays I don't think I would find it as entertaining to just do 1v1, but you're utilizing all of the maps that you were familiar with the game when you played it to play against your friend. And it was super laggy. And there was, I don't know how many times we would start a match and then all of a sudden it would pick up and it'd be like, hello? You would hear the person on the phone coming through your modem.
Yeah.
Right? So, and then, of course, the game would crash because somebody picked up the phone. And then you would get a call after mom had finished her conversation. Sorry, my mom had to call my aunt or something like that. So that was fun.
And there's no control over that. You know, your mom's on the other line and boom, the handset goes up and that's the end of your game. Right. I actually had my mom finally, when I was in like high school, got me my own phone. So, you can have your own phone. It was really for the computer. That's what it was for. I didn't have any friends. I have like 2 friends I would call, you know, and I have my own phone number. That was what that was for. But yeah, man, those old modem days, don't miss those.
Not at all.
Don't miss those at all. Yeah, man. Duke Nukem I never played it as a kid. That was one of those I'd probably be too extreme for me as a impressionable young lad. Sure. Did it have nudity? I don't remember. Did it have like nudity or was it like implied nudity? Okay, it was like implied nudity. Okay. Yeah. All right, that's fine. In those dens of ill repute, let's just say.
Indeed.
Cool, man. Doom was something else entirely. For the time, it was unique. It was different than anything else on the market. Nothing in the PC world was that fast, that engaging, that exciting, that visceral. Traversing those levels in a first-person view, wielding a shotgun and just blowing away different demons was beyond anything I'd experienced and most of my friends had experienced. And there's 2 sides to Doom. There's the gameplay, which is brilliant and still holds up, and the controversy, especially after Columbine. Video game violence was on the tip of everyone's tongue, and when we look at Doom now, it doesn't seem that bad. But think about it from the perspective of a 14-year-old kid who is pretty impressionable. They're still young, their brains aren't fully formed yet. You can understand why parents were concerned, some losing their minds. Was it worth congressional hearings? Probably not. But was it worth talking about? Absolutely. You could argue that not since Mario had a game captured the imagination of gamers everywhere. Everyone played Doom. And while Doom gave birth to some of our most beloved gameplay modes like multiplayer death matches and first-person shooters that actually felt good, that felt visceral, and that felt just buttery in your hands, it opened the door to a lot of negative things too, like your Postals and some of the hyper-violent games that came after that didn't have the joy and the fun of Doom. It was just pure brutality. But in the end, you cannot deny the impact Doom had on the industry and us as young gamers. And I gotta tell you, take it from somebody who played through almost all of the episodes of Doom about a month ago, it still holds up to this day. Thanks so much for listening to the show. If you enjoyed it and enjoyed me for whatever reason, follow me on Twitter at @gamerlooksin40. Leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. Please, please, please. That would be lovely if you did, or whatever streaming platform you support. Follow me on Twitch, 8:30 Central Time. Twitch.tv/agamerlooksit40pod. And finally, if you so incline, want to be next level, support me on Patreon at patreon.com/agamerlooksit40. Thanks again for listening to the show, and we'll see you next time.